Thank you once again to those attendees who have joined us on this webinar. Welcome. And this webinar is hosted by Africa-Led's Partnership. It's entitled Linking Small-Scale Energy and Agriculture to Support Development and Climate Goals. My name is Karen Morris. I'm a Communications Officer at SouthSouthNorth in Cape Town, South Africa. And I'll be the host of this webinar platform. The moderator or facilitator is Josh Ogada, also from SouthSouthNorth, and he will be introducing the presenters and explaining the webinar proceedings. In terms of the general housekeeping for this webinar, we will be addressing questions after all the presentations have been made. Attendees are asked to please submit questions via the Q&A button, which should be at the bottom of your Zoom webinar interface. Please mention the particular presenters to whom you'd like to address the question. Josh will screen the questions and relay them verbally to the panelists. We'll aim to answer as many questions as possible in the allotted time, and any questions we can't answer live will be answered in writing following the event. This webinar is an interactive session, and we will attempt to give attendees who prefer to voice their questions that option. If you'd like to take advantage of that opportunity, please use the raise hand function, and we will try to accommodate you. We might experience technical difficulties while doing that, so please bear with us. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared on the AfLP website. Please consider sharing it with anyone you may know who would like to view it but couldn't attend today. I'd now like to hand over to Josh Ogada, who will continue with the next part of the webinar proceedings.
Thank you very much, Karen. I hope you can hear me clearly. Good afternoon to everybody, and welcome to this webinar on organized by the AFOLU Community of Practice. As Karen mentioned, the title of our webinar today is Linking Small-Scale Energy and Agriculture to Support Development and Climate Goals. We have a list of speakers who will be sharing with us today. Hold on one second. I'm going to try and shift my slides. So as Karen has already done and gone through the housekeeping, if anything is unclear, all participants are able to send a message through and just let us know if you're having any technical difficulties. We are going to go through a number of different topics. We're going to start with an overview of renewable energy links to agriculture in Africa. We're also going to hear a presentation on solar water pumps and another on rice husk briquettes. I would like to mention at the offset that one of our panelists who was planning to join us, Dr. Alain Serge Guardio, is having a few difficulties joining us, and we hope that he will be able to join us by the time he is up to present. But in the meantime, we shall carry on with the first two presentations for which we have panelists available. And as Karen did mention, the question and answers, you will be able to type those in, and I will be directing those to the panelists during the question and answer section. As Karen did mention, also there might be a few difficulties with the raising hand option, but if that happens to be the case, then the question and answer panel should serve our purposes just right. At this stage, I don't know how many new people have joined us, but to those who may have joined us while we were speaking, welcome to you, and we hope to have an active and interactive session. I would like to start off by introducing Jennifer Holthaus, who's the Senior Program Officer at Winrock International and part of the Let's Global Partnership AFOLU Working Group. Over to you, Jennifer.
Great, thank you. I'm going to share my slides really quick. And I want to make sure everybody can see them. Is everybody seeing the overview? And can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can, Jennifer.
Okay, great. So I'm Jan Holthaus. I've worked for Winrock for about 15 years. I work on our clean energy team, and we have a portfolio of projects which we call Powering Agriculture, which are working on off-grid solar applications for small farmers, including solar water pumps and solar chillers. And I want to hand it over for this first slide, the overview, to my colleague Bikash Pandey, and he can also introduce himself.
Yes, good day to everyone. Pandey, I'm the director of the clean energy team at Winrock International. In terms of an overview of renewable energy linking with agriculture, with a focus on Africa, in addition to the two presentations you see today with the link between renewable energy and irrigation pumping and the briquettes for cooking, of course, agriculture and energy have a long history together. In fact, Winrock's own work in energy started with a link with agriculture about 25 years ago, mainly in the area of cogeneration. I've listed that there. It's one of the early strong linkages between agriculture and energy, where the excess energy that's available at sugar mills from the bagasse, cellulose, that can be burned in efficient boilers to produce electricity beyond what is needed at the mill itself. And that can then be used to supply the grid. And this is a major sector in countries like Brazil and India. In recent years, an effort was started called Cogen Africa by UNEP under the GEF. Several countries in East and Southern Africa did introduce cogeneration at sugar mills. The other area Winrock has worked in the past is where agriculture links with energy is with palm oil mill effluents. We've done some work in Indonesia, particularly looking at the fruit bunches of palm oil. Once they are squeezed for oil, the effluent can be used in an anaerobic process to produce methane gas, which can be used to substitute fuel in diesel generators. And that's another renewable energy use of agriculture waste. And, it not only replaces the diesel fuel, but also prevents methane from escaping into the atmosphere, and methane being a potent greenhouse gas. Liquid biofuels are another very important renewable energy agriculture linkage, generally divided into two: biodiesels and bioethanol. Bioethanol in recent years has been used for cooking in certain areas, either directly as a liquid fuel or solidified into gels to put under, in cookers, in efficient stoves. And but the big use of bioethanol, of course, is in fueling transportation in a lot of countries where a certain percentage of the gasoline is mixed in with bioethanol and can be produced from a lot of different products, corn, sugarcane, etc. It's in Africa. I think so far, I don't have an update on how many countries are already mixing ethanol into gasoline. I have seen, however, the use of ethanol for cooking, for cook stoves. It's a very clean burning fuel. and produces almost no emissions. Biodiesel generally is produced from either edible or non-edible oils. So palm oil can be used as a biodiesel. It can be used for running engines. And as you know, Europe has planned to meet quite a bit of its commitment to zero carbon fuels using biodiesels, both produced in Europe as well as imported from other countries. And they have set standards around this. A lot of interest in Africa in terms of the use of the plant Jatropha. And in the references at the end, I've listed several projects where Jatropha is this plant which both stabilizes degraded land and also produces oilseed, which can be used for biodiesel, and several CDM as well as voluntary carbon market projects were developed for this. Some of those are listed in the references. Gasifiers are another avenue for linking energy with agriculture waste with energy. And it's a process of partial combustion of biomass to produce producer gas. It's basically carbon monoxide, which can then be burned later. Because it needs consistency in the fuel, rice husk is often a very popular fuel for this, but other biomass can also be used for this. And again, the gas that comes out is a gas, so it burns very cleanly. It can be used in an engine for electricity production as well as for cooking, and is a very clean burning fuel either way. Large-scale gasifiers have worked well. Small-scale gasifiers still suffer from some technical challenges, mainly on account of the inconsistency of the feed material. It's difficult to get consistent qualities, consistent moisture, consistent calorific value of the fuel that you put in. But something that research is going into, and it's a renewable source of energy. And there is a presentation today on cooking fuel. So where you use, solid biomass still is supplying cooking fuel for 2.5 billion people around the world, and it can result in very dirty air pollution conditions inside homes. So attempts have been made both to use gasifiers, which are relatively expensive, but also to partially combust the biomass to make it cleaner burning. And we will hear example of rice husk briquettes in one of the presentations today. So this was all basically where agriculture produces energy. Well, the reverse is also true. Agriculture needs a lot of energy. And thanks to the availability of, decreasing prices, solar prices, solar water pumps are really in the ascendant, and Jen will talk about that. Solar dryers as well can be used effectively in place of non-renewable types of fuels, either fossil fuels or non-renewable biomass. So I stop there and pass it back to Jen again.
Great, thanks, Bikash. So just to review, there's sort of two major categories here: ag residues being used for energy for other purposes, electricity and home energy use, transportation, cooking. And the second category is renewable energy actually being used on the farm to facilitate ag production and processing. So what I'm going to talk about next is in the second category, solar water pumps. I need to make sure my slides are advancing here. There we go. So this is an area where Winrock's been working for about 5 years, trying to scale up smallholder solar irrigation. And irrigation, which means you need energy to pump water to your fields, is a major area where energy and ag are connected. Smallholder farmers are a huge part of the economy and the population of sub-Saharan Africa. 95% of food grown in sub-Saharan Africa is rain-fed, which means smallholders are waiting for 1 or 2 rainy periods a year in order to grow. Typically, you can only grow staple crops with rain-fed agriculture. And climate change is increasingly threatening rain-fed agriculture. There's a lot of indicators of this, and a lot of studies have been done on it. The less frequent, more intense rain events and increased evaporation and evapotranspiration from plants, as well as a reduction in soil moisture, are all kind of contributing to increased risk of crop failure. And irrigation is one of the key ways to prevent crop failure. Statistics show that irrigated land in Africa in proportion to cultivated land is only about 6%. So of all the agricultural land in sub-Saharan Africa, only 6% is irrigated, compared to 14% for Latin America and 37% for Asia. So Asia has really seen a boom of, in some countries, smallholder irrigation, but Africa has not. When smallholders in Africa do irrigate their land, they typically use either a treadle pump. I don't know if people have ever seen that. It's a very simple device, but it requires your own body to operate it. It's like you have to either jog or you use it with your hip. It requires a lot of energy from humans to operate. Or if they can afford it, they'll rent or buy a diesel pump, which costs about $200 or $250 US to buy. Because the rate of smallholder irrigation is so low in Africa, it's very hard to find statistics on, of those 6% that are irrigating, how many are using diesel pumps, how many are using treadle pumps or other, just a hand in a bucket. I did find a 2012 study, which I hadn't seen before, that says there was an assessment in Ghana that found that 30% of small-scale irrigators owned or leased a motorized pump, and you can pretty much be sure that if that was 2012, that meant a diesel pump. In 2012, the International Water Management Institute did an analysis of the potential to expand the use of motorized pumps because they save so much labor over hauling water or using treadle pumps. And they concluded that small motorized pumps could expand irrigation by 30 million hectares, generate annual net revenues of 22 billion, and improve food security and incomes for 185 million people, and just in sub-Saharan Africa. So that kind of shows you why people are paying attention to smallholder irrigation. One of the things that we've noticed in terms of the ascendance of solar pumps, which Bikash mentioned, solar pumps obviously either pump surface water or groundwater, and sub-Saharan Africa has huge untapped groundwater resources. 4 times the amount of groundwater that exists in India, which is already very heavily using pumping, and twice that of China. If you combine that with the advent of affordable solar pumps within the last 4 or 5 years, then you really have an amazing sort of new opportunity for increased food security and climate change resilience for millions of smallholder farmers. So I want to talk about the technology here. I was surprised when I first started working on this years ago that solar pumps have existed and have been used for irrigation since the 1980s. They're a very robust technology. As you can see in the diagram, I want to point out that the pump, which either goes at the bottom of a groundwater well or could go in a pond or a river, is no different than the pump you would use with a diesel generator. It could be a centrifugal pump, a diaphragm pump. There's very typical types of pumps in use, and that is the same with a solar pump. The only difference is that the power comes from solar panels. It could be one solar panel that you just prop up on the ground next to the pump. It could be 2 solar panels fixed on a metal frame that sit above the ground. And then the sort of slightly fancier pumps actually have a control box, and the easiest way to explain that is that the strength of the insolation from the sun, the strength of the energy coming from the sun varies throughout the day. And if you have a control box, you can mediate the voltage going to the pump, which allows you to pump more hours during the day. So it can operate when the sun is weak and also when the sun is strong. And one of the beautiful things about solar pumps is that you don't need a battery. So you pump during the day when the sun is out, and usually you size the pump so that you can pump enough during the day and you don't need to be pumping at night. Pumps, depending on the quality, have different lifespans. Some of them wear out in a year or two. Some of the more expensive ones can last a number of years, but solar panels are usually guaranteed by the manufacturer for 20 to 25 years, and then they actually last for 40, 50 years without significant deterioration in the output. In Kenya, the price of solar pumps has gone down quite a bit, even since we started our project there in 2014. At the moment, the least powered pumps, if you have a shallow water source or a pond, are about $200 US, up to 15 meters total dynamic head. That's a measure of the power of the pump. And if you have a deeper borehole or you're farther from a water source, then it goes up to about $1,500. And that's already a big decrease from what we saw even 3 years ago. The cost of solar panels has come down 60% in the last 5 years and is expected to continue decreasing by another 50% in the next 5 years. So that's just been a very dramatic shift in the solar panel industry. And here I'm going to hand it over to Bikash. This is sort of the summary that I gave before about the International Water Management Institute estimating the potential benefits of motorized pumps. This is our take on it in Kenya for solar pumps. Bikash, are you?
Okay. Yeah, taking up where Jen started, we do know that pumps will play a major role in irrigation in Africa, given the expected population increase. Good example of how it might play out can be seen from South Asia and China, which each have close to 30 million pumps each. In those countries, when they went into irrigated agriculture in a big way in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, diesel was cheap and the grid was expanding. So it's today a combination of both grid-powered pumps as well as diesel pumps. To give you an example, India tripled its food production from the 1950s, so increase of 200% on just 5% more land, mainly on the back of pumps. I mean, new land was only increased by 5%, and the irrigation system, the surface irrigation system, was already there from colonial times and has hardly expanded. So much of the expansion is on the back of these 30 million pumps. And as Africa starts on this path, diesel is a lot more expensive with competition from large emerging markets, while solar has come down in price. So how to get these, what is the trajectory of how irrigation might look in sub-Saharan Africa? Taking an example of Kenya and taking the example of a $650 solar pump, we estimate that there's a market for about 1 million solar pumps around that size, some larger, some smaller, just in Kenya alone. So in terms of where we are right now, end of 2017, we estimate about 3,000 solar pumps are sold in a year. The $650 solar pump, from our experience, is able to generate just in the first year by both growing higher value crops and doing 3 crops, about $1,300 a year. So it pays for the pump and generates average gross profit margin of another $645. And so clearly it can be financed. If it can be financed, these numbers can grow. But to grow from 3,000 pumps per year to about 100,000 pumps in 5 years requires 70% annual growth year on year, and would require a total investment of about $65 million. So quite a bit of investment needed, a lot of it in financing that people would be able to pay back from the extra income that they generate. Next slide, please. The beauty of solar pumps also, unlike in Asia, is that the GHG mitigation is a huge plus. So again, taking the example of India, 6% of India's total greenhouse gas emissions right now comes from agricultural pumping, either from the grid, which is about 75% coal-based, so that is also highly GHG producing, as well as diesel pumps. So just going by those same numbers again, we would estimate the 100,000 pumps in 5 years in Kenya to avoid the emissions of about 68,000 tons of CO2 equivalent. So this is kind of the beauty of the solar pumps, both on the mitigation side as well as on the productivity side. Over to Jen.
Great. So we want to give you 2 individual examples. We did some on-farm return on investment case studies in Kenya as part of Winrock's Kenya's Smallholder Solar Irrigation Project, which was funded by USAID. And the first case study is a very typical farmer, Lillian Akinyi, who lived in Homa Bay County in Kenya. And she was not a landowner. She was renting this plot of land. And actually, she has since moved across the border to a different place, but took her pump with her. So I think this is a good example of sort of a bottom of the pyramid farmer. In September 2016, she invested about US $780 in a solar pump and a water pipe. So she doesn't even own a tank. She didn't want to invest in any infrastructure on the land because she was renting. And she had been renting a diesel pump, and she stopped doing that. And she just irrigated with a sprinkler or a hose that she held in her hand and walked around. And she was able to increase her irrigated acreage to 1.25 acres from 1 acre. And we find that a lot with solar pump users. People that use diesel tend to be very stingy with their irrigation because diesel is expensive. You have to get on a motorbike to go get the fuel. You have to rent the pump or buy the pump. And when you have solar, as long as the sun is out, you can pump. And so people often increase not only their yields, but also their irrigated acreage. She paid about $200 down, and she made a monthly loan payment of about $25 a month for 22 months. So she was able to spread the cost out over almost 2 years. And this marginal increase in her gross profit shown on the right is the additional income she made as a result of being able to irrigate. So we really wanted to separate out, farming is profitable if you don't irrigate, and we really wanted to understand how much more you could make. As Bikash said, about $1,300 more because of being able to irrigate. And the second profile is the sort of the pump at the higher end of the price spectrum. And this has come down quite a bit since we did this study. But at the time, in 2015, a pump for a deep borehole, which this gentleman, Shadrach Nzioka, had in Machakos County, was like $2,500 US just for the pump. And he invested in other things, including a water tank, improving his borehole, which was a bit expensive, and a drip kit. And again, we saw an increase in his irrigated acreage when he switched to solar, and now growing 2 crops a year instead of 1. And this was also impressive, even with the fairly high initial capital expense of $4,600 US. He maintained his positive gross profit margin even while he was paying off his 2-year loan. And again, using conservative estimates, his gross profit we expected it to increase by 215%. That's a permanent increase after he paid off his loan. And then just finally, the barriers to solar water pump sales, and this is sort of constantly changing. We sort of had a discussion about this for this presentation, like what's changed in the last 2 years, even in the last year. Low farmer awareness, low awareness in general of solar pumps is still a huge barrier. I think all of the players in the ag sector, including processors, distributors, farmers, exporters, don't really realize solar pumps exist for smallholders. You can buy them off the shelf. You do have to size them properly, but there are an increasing number of high quality products available in Kenya and starting to be in other countries as well. Farmers tend to have very few credit options for purchasing pumps. Financial institutions don't really understand the pump. They don't realize that it's a productive asset, which will directly increase the farmer's income. So they want a lot of collateral. They want you to have a salary or a lot of assets that farmers typically don't have. And then the lack of aggregated orders for pumps, that's a sign of being sort of at the early stage of the commercial market. It's hard for pump suppliers to set up repair networks and distribution in rural areas if they're getting one order here and one order there. On the supply side, a lot of the barriers have fallen away. What we saw 2 years ago has really improved. There's a lot more high quality pump products available. There's a lot more distribution across Kenya and starting to be in many other countries. Even the third-party assessment of quality, we think, might be resolved. CLASP is planning to publish performance test results for pumps, and that will help a lot. In terms of being a consumer, it's hard to know which pump to purchase, and having independent information on the performance and quality of pumps will be really helpful. And the solutions in the right-hand column there are all the things that Winrock has been working on. And then finally, once these slides are posted, you'll be able to click on these links. We compiled some of the best resources that we know, toolkits on designing pumps. Winrock has published papers on results of our project. And then there's a number of major initiatives, different donors. Powering Ag is funded by USAID and a lot of international donors. So those are resources on solar irrigation. And then we have some general resources on energy for agriculture. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Jennifer and Bikash. Before we switch over to Professor Almeida Sitoe, there were a couple of questions and a comment from Kuji Chitiva and Billy Katontoka. I hope it will be okay if these are addressed or answered at the end during the Q&A session. And in the meantime, I've just been looking and seeing that all our panelists are now here. We've been joined by Alain Serge Kouadio as well. Thank you very much and welcome. But we're going to move straight on to Professor Almeida Sitoe, who is a professor of silviculture and ecology of tropical forests at the Center for Agriculture Natural Resource Studies at the Faculty of Agronomy and Forestry at the Eduardo Mondlane University in Mozambique. Can I pass it over to you, Professor Almeida Sitoe, if you are online and ready and are able to share your slide screen?
Hello, can you hear me? Just testing. Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, Professor. Yes, we can hear you.
Can you now see my slides?
Not yet. To share slide, you just have to click the share screen button that's on your menu. It's the little green folder with the arrow facing upward.
Let me see it. Okay. Okay, yeah.
Right. There should be a panel that opens on your screen, which, there we go, it's starting.
Okay.
All right, now just to put your presentation on full view. And there you go. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm presenting this on behalf of the Mozambican team on modeling low emissions development strategies, which includes. Hello?
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Professor, but if you can just put your presentation on full view, please, as we can see your...
I'm trying to do that, but now lost on this and I can't see where that thing is.
Yeah, there you go. Yes, that's the button, that's correct.
Is it so?
Yes.
No, let me do this and do this.
Yes, if you click there.
Okay. Can you see it now?
Yes, it's now on presenter mode.
Okay, let me just switch the screens because I'm working here on two screens and I don't know exactly where One is going where? Is there any other options? Sorry for doing this now. If there is any other options to do this quickly.
Hi, Professor. So,
Yeah.
Jessie, she has your slide, and to assist you, she will share it from her computer.
Yeah, okay, that will be fine. Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, thank you very much. So my presentation, as I was saying, is on behalf of the Mozambican modeling team on low emissions development strategy, which includes among two options of reducing emissions from the agriculture sector, and which with one of them is the small scale irrigation scheme. Next slide, please. Mozambique. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yes, please. Okay, thank you. Mozambique is a large country with about 80 million hectares, actually, but the cropping area is just as little as only 5.6 million hectares, which is only 12% of the potential agricultural area, actually. And of this, it's only 0.5% which is irrigated land. So this is actually a figure which is even slower than the one indicated in previous presentation by Jennifer, which was indicating the average of 95% in the sub-Saharan Africa. Indicating, of course, that it's a very little area and it represents a major drawback in the agricultural development sector in Mozambique. Next slide, please. So in this exercise of simulating or modeling the low emissions development strategies in Mozambique, we did this exercise, which include the exercise of running a simulation model that will help us estimate the emissions reduction potential from the agriculture sector. And as I said, the exercise include the agroforestry system, which I'm not talking about agroforestry system in this presentation today, but it includes also the small irrigation scheme, which is the one that I'm talking today. The idea actually is to provide the information, technical information to support policy development, especially on the NDC, which is a requirement for the parts of the UNFCCC. Next slide, please. So this is the action that I'm going to talk about it now, which is the exercise of replacing fuel-powered irrigation pumps with solar-powered irrigation. Next slide. So as base to do that, we use the information from the national statistics, taking as the reference the year 2010, which indicated that only about 27 hectares were irrigated land, of which about 60% were sugarcane. Sugarcane is a major crop in Mozambique, and it's done mostly by the industry, not by small farmers. But we also have other crops like the cereals, legumes, root and tubers, which are mostly grown by small-scale farmers. And those are mostly irrigated by the fuel powered irrigation. So that's the target where we suggest that replacement can take place. We use the projections established in the national strategies in Mozambique, which projects to about 90,000 hectares irrigated land by 2020. And we assume the same growth rate up to 2030. Assumed also a linear trend in that projection. We also collected some additional information from the literature, especially the emission factors and the crop water requirements and the irrigation efficiency and so on. Next slide. In this plot here, we are just showing the proportion of the irrigated land by crop or crop group. In this case, as I said, 60% is sugarcane, and followed by vegetables, cereals, pulses, and roots and tubers. And this is projected to reach about 90,000 hectares by 2020. Next slide. So this scheme actually has been also explained by Jennifer in the previous presentation, that we are considering that the irrigation using a water pump is a normal process. The only difference between fuel powered irrigation and solar powered irrigation is the source of energy. In this case, we are considering that emissions will come from the diesel or gasoline powering a generator to provide energy to the water pump. So the exercise of the replacement will be actually to change the source of energy to solar panel, which in this case, we are considering that it has zero emissions. Next slide, please. So the projection that we carried out in this exercise is shown in this plot, which shows clearly that as we increase the irrigated land, as suggested in the national strategies, the emissions associated to the use of fuel-powered irrigation will also increase in the same proportion as indicated here by crop. Next slide. So by replacing fuel-operated pumps by solar-powered irrigation options, we'll have the option to reduce significantly the emissions. In this case, we are showing some of the potential areas where replacement can be carried out, especially in the vegetable production and also in the root and tubers and also the leguminous crops. Next. This plot presents the total emissions reduction from considering all the crops, actually comparing the business as usual, which is steadily increasing, compared with the scenario of reduction starting in 2017. This is a process which the Ministry of Agriculture has been piloting already, and there are some examples already on the ground, but they are yet on the piloting phase. And this is an option that is being considered to expand a lot in the near future. Next slide. So, as I said, we did this exercise also considering the use of alternative to slash and burn in agroforestry system. I'm using this plot just for comparison in terms of the impact of replacing fuel irrigated options and the impact of replacing slash and burn by agroforestry, showing that the impact of solar irrigation in terms of reduction emissions is relatively low. This is mostly explained because of the also very low irrigated area compared to the slash and burn area in Mozambique. But although the reduction emission is relatively low here, as we can see, the next slide we can see also the same situation. Next slide, please. And next slide again. We can see that the biggest contribution of the solar panel irrigation in Mozambique at present, especially in a situation where there is yet little irrigated area, is related to the economics of it, which has been also explained in the previous presentation. In this case, we observe that the cost of diesel-operated irrigation is extremely costly compared to the solar power irrigation. So by saying this, suggesting that there will be eventually more people engaged in irrigation process if solar powered irrigation could be provided. Because now the cost of diesel powered irrigation is prohibitively high cost. Next slide. So looking at the socioeconomic indicators in those two plots, we can also see that solar powered irrigation reduces emissions, but not all systems can be replaced yet. As I said, Mozambique is still in the experimental and the piloting phase. But there are chances actually to increase the use of this technology. And by doing so, there will also be increase a chance for more people to invest in irrigation, then contributing also a lot in their resilience to climate change issues. So what our suggestion here is that by doing this, technology like those ones will be highly appreciated by the politicians, where the agenda is mostly driven by the promoting economic development, also promoting increased productivity in the agriculture sector. And this is an effective option actually of doing that. And finally, the next slide. To conclude, saying that there is a great deal of opportunities to reduce emissions, and in the agriculture sector, especially by using solar powered irrigation. In the solar power irrigation, although it has little impact in comparative terms to other technology related to land use change options, it provides significant increase in economic returns and increased opportunities for more people to engage in irrigated agriculture. So this analysis does not consider emissions associated with manufacturing and disposal of photovoltaic system, which so far we did not include in the evaluation and see what will be the emissions related to that process as well. And the good news to the system is that solar power irrigation is presently being considered as part of the country NDC packet of options. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Sitoe. Just a reminder to our participants that please feel free to put in any questions or comments you have. You can add those in the Q&A section for response at the end. We already have a couple of questions for the first presentation, and we shall cover those and get answers to those in the Q&A section at the end. I believe Dr. Kwadjo is with us. He's going to be our next speaker, and he's going to be talking to us about the use of rice husk briquettes for cooking fuel in his country, Cote D'Ivoire. Dr. Kwadjo is the Director of the Green Economy and Social Responsibility within the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development in Cote d'Ivoire. So if you are ready, Dr. Kwadjo, to share your screen, I will pass the floor over to you.
Hello?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. It's okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello?
Can you hear us?
Okay.
Excellent.
Okay, yeah.
I share my screen.
Can I start now?
Yes, you can start as Jessie is showing your presentation from her computer.
Okay. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to join this meeting. It's very difficult to me to connect, but I think it's okay now. So my presentation focused on the local project in Cote d'Ivoire about rice as briquette for cooking fuel in Cote d'Ivoire. So before start, just say Cote d'Ivoire is a West Africa countries and forest area, and of economy based mainly on agriculture. So the agenda of the next please. The agenda of my presentation, there's 4 points. I just have a presentation of the context, cooking energy in Cote d'Ivoire and its impact on climate change, and a brief presentation of the Africa-led projects in Cote d'Ivoire, and after that, the activity to recover rice residue in combustible briquettes, and lastly, the challenge of the key element of the success of this model. And for the next one, please. And okay, biomass is the main source of energy in sub-Saharan Africa, and accounts for 60% to 80% of energy balance in most countries. More than 500 million African dependent on it daily. So if you know, in this picture, we have biomass is very, very the main source of energy in our household and industry, local industry. And the next one, please. The next, please. Okay, so in Cote d'Ivoire, biomass is one of the most strategic source of renewable energy policy. Before that, before return, please. The next, no, the last one, please. The last one. So okay, so yeah, okay. So Cote d'Ivoire is one of the largest biomass deposits in Africa, and we are estimated at 12 million tons per year. Biomass is more accessible and more easily exploitable for energy purposes, and 73% domestic energy consumed come from fuel and after petroleum production and electricity. And in the real, we have this rate come to 1994% for firewood. But however, this form of exploitation is the second cause of deforestation in Cote d'Ivoire. The next one, please. The next, please. The next slide. Okay. The next. Okay, so to help Cote d'Ivoire to have to modeling. Okay. Okay. The last one, please. Okay. So Cote d'Ivoire is one of the pilot countries to implement the projects, Africa-led projects, focus on the implementation of modeling led in Cote d'Ivoire. So these projects have a component focus on the demonstration activities on rice fields in a local area, agricultural area, and the next one, please. The next. Okay, so we are demonstration project includes development of smart, climate smart agriculture, and production of the last one, please. Excuse me. The last. The last, please. Okay. So, and second is the establishment of capacity building. None of the next. The next. Okay. Wait. Okay. So okay. So for the waste, we transform waste to energy elements. We have identified a local enterprise called Africa Business Group, who make fuel briquettes, partnering with the project to convert rice from identified farmer to briquettes. So we organize the waste rice collects by the young people in 2 villages, and the transport the rice in this enterprise to have material to transform this material in a briquette. So the next one, please. The next. So this is the framework of the model in Cote d'Ivoire. I think we have some of model in many countries. So we collect the rice in a farm, and to collect them, develop a system of collect this rice and go to this enterprise to transform them in a briquette. So the next slide, the next, please. Okay, thank you. So no, the last one. The last one. Okay. So the add value of the project is to improve the process of briquette production. So here the enterprise managed by a woman produce briquettes, white briquettes. So when she have a test in the market, in the household, the result is not so good. So the project proposed to develop a carbonizer with in this process, and have best production, the best briquette, and to improve the process. So the lesson, I think, is the main thing I can say. The lesson we can share with you is the next slide. The next. Okay, so the project is continue to implementation. So from now, the main challenge and the key element of the success is one, to the test of energy efficiency of briquette produced. We have a comparative with business as usual position of some of combustible of cooking, energy cooking, and this is okay now because we have a result, a best result to the energy efficiency of briquette we produce. But the second challenge is to ensure that the production process does not lead to an impact transfer. I think it's very important, calculated down to the level of GHG mitigation in terms of save forests and GHG emitting by the process. So the modeling team is in this project do this study to know that how we can improve again the process to mitigate the emission of carbon emission. And the first challenge is the cultural acceptance of the people, resistance to the change, because usually over energy, cook energy, and like gas, like wood, and so on and so on. So it is now difficult. So we need to have a case study about it. And the fourth challenge is to have a business plan to know that this model is the productivity and the income from this model is okay. And now we plan to finish this business plan to show with you. And the last is to determine the condition of duplicating this process in a national level. So we think is the main challenge and key element we can have to success. And we hope if this model is have a success story in other countries, we are very happy to have to continue in this way. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kwadwo, for that presentation. I think we are now about to get to the point where we will be addressing some of the questions that have been sent in for the different presenters. There were a couple of questions that were sent in during Jennifer and Bikash's presentation. There was the first one by Billy Katon-Toka, who asked about biogas missing on producing electricity and whether it's a case of lack of efficiency or any other reason. And there's also a question from one of our attendees, we don't have a name, who asks, he says, apologies if this concern has already been addressed, which I don't think it has, but the proliferation of solar-powered water pumps may make groundwater relatively cheap and accordingly lead users to significant greater demands on finite water resources. And he's asking if there are any examples of how individual users' demands are being successfully monitored to avoid depleting groundwater. Maybe we can start with those before we move to a question that was specifically for Professor Sitoe. So could I please hand over to you, Jennifer and Bikash, if you could address those?
Jen?
Yeah, Bikash, do you want to take the first one about biogas?
Yeah, so yes, on the biogas. So yes, I did think about that. I mean, a lot of the domestic type of biogas plants are linked with livestock rather than direct, you know, other types of land use agriculture, although there's clearly a link. But yes, biogas is a very effective technology for cooking fuels and also in some cases for generating electricity. There are several programs in Africa right now to increase the number of biogas digesters. The one biogas example I did include on my slide related directly with land use was the POMI, the palm oil mill effluent. So what is produced there is biogas, and that's at a larger scale and can be used for electricity. But the small-scale biogas digesters, which can be used by farmers with as little as 2 or 3 cows, I think is a powerful technology which directly replaces cooking fuel and very clean cooking fuel. And the slurry that comes out is also a very good fertilizer, high in nitrogen. So yes, biogas could be included on that list of linkages between energy and agriculture.
And then on the groundwater question, it's definitely something we have thought about, and it's something that will need to be addressed as pumping gets scaled up. What I know about it, we did have a conversation with the International Water Management Institute, IMI, about this, and they had done a study in one country in sub-Saharan Africa where they showed in a particular aquifer that even with fairly low density, small groundwater pumps, there were effects on the drawdown of the water table. So what I know is that it's very highly dependent on the aquifer. Some aquifers are bigger and some are smaller, and how it gets replenished with rains or other sources of water. And the other question is, who would do that monitoring? It's not going to be the solar pump company. They're just selling the pumps. And I don't know, Bikash, if you have other comments or how this is managed in places where there's very heavy pumping, like India, Bangladesh.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very serious problem with diesel pumping and grid-based pumping already. And I understand there are satellite-based technologies which are able to basically look at the groundwater level and perhaps regulate how much water can be used. The one particular issue that was brought up regarding the cheap solar energy. So the point is that because all the costs on the solar pumps are in the hardware, once that is purchased, does that give incentive, a perverse incentive for people just to keep pumping water because the cost of pumping is zero, and even when the returns are quite low? And that's an important question, very specific to solar pumping, because it needs no fuel. There's some interesting pilots being done where solar pumping is actually being done with a connection to the grid in areas that the grid actually exists in. And the idea being that when the water is not used, the electricity can be sold to the grid. That way, the choice is between selling electricity to the grid, which has a value, versus using it for agriculture. So when the value to agriculture gets lower than the value to selling to the grid, the rational choice is to shift to that. So there's some interesting pilots being done with that model. I know of one in India. There's probably some in other places as well.
Thank you, Bikash.
There was also a question about tobacco curing.
That's right.
Yeah, I don't have great expertise in this area, but the one time I did look at it, it seemed like tobacco requires very exact curing conditions. And because solar is not reliable in that sense, and the time when the curing has to be done is pretty precise, I understand this is one of the reasons why solar drying has not been used extensively for tobacco, and other forms of curing are used. Solar drying gets used very effectively for drying fruits and vegetables, where the timing of the drying is less critical. So that's my understanding, but I'm not an expert on the tobacco curing using solar.
And there's one other question on solar pumps in the chat panel about how to scale up financing for solar. It's an interesting take. Could smallholders band together and apply to the Global Climate Fund, or maybe a national government program for scale up? Bikash, is the IFC project relevant as a model, or how would you
Yes, I
answer
think
that?
so. I mean, I think scaling up is a challenge. I mean, who should do the scaling up? I think if it is to the GCF, it would be have to be done probably through the government or the Department of Irrigation or large value chain, maybe if it is to the IFC or another financing institution, I think either the equipment supplier or the off-taker, somebody who's buying the produce from thousands of farmers, could also, I think, be the aggregator. So different types of aggregators. I mean, there are countries now that have a very clear policy on a subsidy for solar pumps. Strong example in Bangladesh right now, where about 50% of the cost of the pumps are, subsidized by the government, and 40%, I think it is, and then another 40% is given as soft loans. And at that level of support, I visited a plant recently where they were actually using it to get an extra crop of paddy, and paddy cultivation using solar, it is expensive just because you need so much water for one crop. So in cases like that, where a large institution is organizing this and wants to do thousands of pumps like this, GCF or World Bank funding seems to be the way to go. Where you're talking about, working through an off-taker, somebody who's an exporter of beans or something, or somebody who's buying produce from farmers to sell to the capital city, and it's a private company. In that case, I think IFC would be a good example where they could finance something like this, or another type of impact investors, I think, or even commercial banks, I think, could be financing them. And then when the farmer could pay off the pump with through a checkoff system, where they get paid the value of the produce minus the cost of the pump. So we know of some good examples in Kenya where this is being tried as well.
Thank you very much, Bikash, for that. Maybe just to shift over to you, Professor Sitoya, there was a question that was coming from one of our attendees who's asking what, in your opinion, are some of the barriers or limitations to irrigation in cereal systems?
Yeah. Actually, we did not include the irrigation in cereal systems here because our agricultural specialists were suggesting that in Mozambique, the major irrigation in the cereal crops were not actually by use of water pumps, but by the gravity. So that's the only reason why we did not include the cereals in that process. But also note that the reason why we did not include the sugarcane, there were two reasons. One is because it's mostly industrial crop, and second, because the source of energy is mostly electricity from the grid, which comes from the hydropower. So that's why those two crops were not included in our exercise.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Professor Sitoya. I hope that answers the question for our attendee. We've got a question from Florent Eveille. Then this is addressed to you, Dr. Kwadjo. They would like to know what the specific role is of the different partners in the project. So whether it's UNEP or LEDS or FAO, what was their specific role in the project?
The specific role of what? The partner?
Yes, the role of the different partners in the project.
Okay, thank you. There are some of our partners. UNEP is the general technical coordinate in the project, And when we have some of proposal, framework proposal and modeling proposal where they give us some issue and make sure and the project, the agenda of the project. And the partner, national partner is the government. Government of some queue of minister like plan minister and agriculture, environmental, and energy, and so on and so on. So we have some of political task force is already established, and they work to know that our the policy, our INDC framework and the three main sector, economic sector, we have a queue, the main source of emission of carbon emission, and this they include in our work in this project, and the research and academic partner, the modeling team based in the university, and the chair of the modeling team is the laboratory work on climate, modeling climate, and so on and so on, and socio-economic aspects. And the last partner is local, because we have a demonstration project. So the local government authority is one of partner in the local field, and another local agency like called ANADE is a local partner. So we are some of ecosystem of partner. We share the information about it, and you build this model with all the partner in this project.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kwadwo. Another question that came in for you was, what are the other biomass materials which can be used to produce the briquettes other than the rice husks?
Okay, no, in this project, it's only the waste from rice, but we are another component to produce biogas with whole waste, agricultural waste, but we don't start this aspect. So in briquette is only rice waste, but we are some of technology transferred from another enterprise who have some of success story in a local in another seat. They come in Genwa in the seat of the project to share their experiences of our project. So I think one of the add value of this project, how we can share South-South technology transferred. So it's only rice waste.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kwadwo. At this point, I think we have gone through the questions that we have. Are there any other questions? Yes, I see another question has come in from Bamik Boye, who's asking, can we replicate these projects in other countries, especially the irrigation one and the rice briquette? So he's asking about the replicability of the any plans that there might be to scale up or to have this in other countries as well, except for the countries that have been mentioned in the presentations.
Yeah, it's very true. I think the goals or the finality of this project is have a reflection about on the condition to scale up. And because of energy sector free main include our NDC. So this pilot project can I think if we have a best process of briquette production, and we know that rice is the main food consumed in Cote d'Ivoire and produced in all the area and the national area. So we think if the model in Gaiwa is a success story, improve the process, the smart process, and the low emission process, and we know that is the profitability is clear. We hope that to have implementation, another region, another seat, and maybe develop a program, a national program to this. So we hope to go in this way, this direction.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Kwade, for that. There is another a comment from one of our panelists. They are looking for some advice. They have 1 hectare which has plenty of groundwater, and they already have a building on site. They would like to know how one finds funding to harvest groundwater and link it to a building into utilizing excess electricity. So I think if you have any thoughts, Jennifer or Bikash, on any advice that Tadiwe Mchunu might benefit from you.
Hello?
Hi, Bikash, we can hear you.
Okay, yes. Solar pumps generally now have become a commercial product, and so difficult to get funding for that. I think financing is oftentimes the way we see forward, where if you can demonstrate the benefits and the revenue stream, you can get a loan from a microfinance institution or a bank for purchasing pumps. So yeah, I think that perhaps is the way to go because it should be able to demonstrate commercial viability.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. Okay. At this point, we do not have any more outstanding questions, and we are heading towards the end of our webinar. There are, however, a couple of things that we would like to notify you about as the attendees, and more specifically, we'd like to talk about what is offered within the Africa-led Partnership in Action. We've got what we call real assistance, or in other words, remote expert assistance for LEDs. Now, this is basically a no-cost, on-demand technical assistance and matchmaking service, which is available to members and government representatives to assist in advancing your LEDs policies and programs, as well as strategies. And of course, as I mentioned, it is accessible to not only government actors and representatives, but also institutions working in the technical areas, consultants, and NGOs who are working directly with governments. And all the information on REAL, or if you want any assistance on LEAD, you can, on REAL, you can either contact the Africa-led partnership. We have the Africa Secretariat email address up on the screen now. Or you can also contact LED's GP directly and speak to them about REAL, and the person you would speak to is Karishma, whose email address is on there as well. But we'd also encourage you to visit the LED's GP assistance page. The URL is also on the screen now. The other way to do it is to connect via working groups and the communities of practice. Specifically in this case, the AFOLU community of practice would be able to give you all information about this. We have a question from Karim who's asking if the presentations will be made available, and the answer to that is yes. The presentations will be made available. Correct me if I'm wrong, Karen, but these will be made available on the LED's GP as well as the AFLP sites.
Hi, Josh. Yes, we will make it available on the websites during the course of next week.
Excellent. I hope that answers your question, Karim, and I'm sure there may have been a couple of other people who are wondering about that. At this stage, if we do not have any other questions or interventions, final words from the panelists maybe, I would take this opportunity to say a very big thank you to Dr. Kwadio, Professor Sitoe, to Jennifer, and to Bikash as well for sharing your incredible insights and also answering questions that some of the attendees have asked in the course of your presentations. And to thank also all those who took the time to attend this webinar. We ask you to watch this space. There will be more webinars organized either through the AFOLU community of practice, the AFLP, or even the Africa Mini-Grids community of practice. So we shall be giving this information way in advance in order for people to prepare and set the time aside to join us for the webinars. We do really enjoy hearing from you and getting a chance for you to ask questions to the panelists that we have. I think it's also great when the panelists or the presenters have taken time to prepare the presentations, that we have an audience that is present but also able to interact with them. And we thank you very much for this. At this point, we shall bid you goodbye until the next time, and thank you very much to everybody.